It goes without saying that humans are near experts when it comes to hurting one another. Granted, we typically see accidents more so than anything, displays of Darwinism at their finest, but those that go out of their way to do harm find themselves in a uniquely disturbed position. They can either take a vanilla approach, breaking bones, peeling skin, or removing teeth and nails. Or perhaps they will feel inclined to indulge in more elaborate methods of torture. Torture, a word which, for many, paints a fairly vivid picture. Screaming souls and pained persons at the mercy of faceless strangers in a dark room. Though you may be into the vintage styles instead. The rack, rat torture, or if you were a sailor, keel hauling, to name a few. But at least some of these are a touch dull, don't you think? That isn't to say that any of these methods were pleasant to experience. Quite the opposite, obviously. But there are certainly worse, or at least more obscure, methods which are deserving of the limelight. We won't be delving too deep into any histories associated with the methods. That would be a different video altogether. Anyway, let's start with something simple. By the late 1500s, nearing the turn of the century, a rudimentary device had been constructed for the purpose of punishing men, but mostly women, who either misbehaved or were thought to be witches. Introducing the ducking stool. The design was remarkably simple. A large wooden beam attached to a hinged post. On one side, a chair that the scold would be fastened to. From the other side, a group of townsfolk would operate the contraption. In some cases, scolds were suspended and nothing more, leaving them exposed for all to see and mock. Later instances were used to dunk offenders in bodies of water for extended periods of time. Again, their main purpose was that of humiliation, but as you might guess, drowning was not an uncommon occurrence. The process evolved even further, during the witch trials specifically. The chair was retired, and the accused was met with a miserable fate. A thumb was tied to the opposite toe, with an added length of rope tied around their waist. The testing process was quick and easy. First, the witch would be tossed into a body of water, and the spectators would wait. If she rose back up, they believed she was guilty of coercing with the devil and would be burned at the stake. But if she drowned, the crowd deemed her pure, free of unholy influence, and of course, her life. Although terribly brutal, this method is among the easiest to perform. The ancient Chinese practice of waist chopping. It is exactly what you think it is. As opposed to a victim's neck being fastened to a chopping block, waiting for an axe to hack it off, the poor soul will be tied across a bench. From there, the executioner would bring a large bladed instrument, such as a guandao, and begin the delicate process of sawing the victim in half. This process continued for many centuries, as a form of capital punishment. Vile as it may be, this is still fairly tame, at least for any onlookers. You're likely familiar with the horrifying process of being buried alive. This is not that. At least, not one-to-one. If you were to be buried alive, your grave would likely be forgotten with time, your resting place eventually being reclaimed by nature. Immurement, otherwise known as live entombment, may result in your corpse becoming an art piece in some macabre gallery, or more likely, you would be forgotten as insulation in a brick wall. A notable story involving live entombment comes from North Africa. In 1906, a serial killer from the city of Marrakesh had claimed the lives of at least 36 women. Following the discovery of the many bodies buried beneath his store, the legal system found little difficulty in convicting him for his crimes. He had been immured, sealed away in a wall, but his voice remained audible. And for 2 days, the man wailed and screamed for all to hear, begging for them to let him out. And by the 3rd day, the racket ceased, and the city returned to its previous state. The history of immurement is vast, far outweighing the scope of this current video. From sacrifice to voluntary entombment, there is much to dissect and discuss. I encourage you to do your own digging if you feel so inclined. Otherwise, I may come back to the topic at a later date. We're beginning to enter speculative territory. Like the legendary blood eagle supposedly used by the Vikings, there are a number of other instruments and procedures which are subject to scrutiny. Regardless of their validity, they're enjoyable to explore and ponder. The Pear of Anguish is a peculiar device. Its exact use is, to this day, unclear. However, the present hypothesis is discomforting to imagine. The tool consists of a metal body, similar in shape to a pear, that extends into a number of segments. These segments, with the use of a spring or by turning a key, could be opened and closed with ease. Historians in favor of the idea of this being a torture device suggest that the tool would be inserted into the orifice of choice. Expanding the segments whilst lodged inside of the victim could result in anything from gagging to horrifying mutilation. Now, let your mind fill in the gaps. And our final entry, another torture method with a hotly debated existence. Scaphism, allegedly a practice conducted by the ancient Persians, first recorded by the Greeks around 500 BC. Scaphism proved to be the result of a madman, solidifying itself, assuming it truly occurred, as one of the most horrifying ways to die. Victims were stripped of their clothes and placed inside a small boat, or hollowed-out log. Their limbs were then restrained to each end of the boat, preventing any chance of escape. They were then force-fed a mixture of milk and honey until they lost control of their digestive system. Effectively, wading in a pool of vomit and feces, their skin was then coated in a layer of the same milk and honey mixture. Left in the Persian sun, they would ferment in a pool of bodily waste and sugar. Over the following days, insects would begin to feast on the putrid concoction. Wasps and ants would find their way and torment the victim, biting and stinging the victim as they thrashed about with what little energy they had left. But these were the savory moments. As they were left nude and baking in the sun, certain insects found these victims to be perfect for laying their eggs. Crawling inside of unprotected orifices, larvae hatched and began eating their way out of the victim. In order to avoid starving or dehydration, because God forbid they should be subjected to such cruelties like a lack of food or water, they were nourished at regular intervals. Thankfully, this would provide the feasting larvae with added nutrients to grow big and strong. A happy ending for our six-legged friends. This process will continue for quite some time, inducing madness in the victim. Nothing compares to the sensation of thousands of little eggs crawling over your skin and inside of various cavities, from the eyes, nose, and mouth to more sensitive areas. Worms and parasites would be born in the filthy mixture of waste, swimming inside of the victim and repeating the cycle. According to the Greek historian Plutarch, he had witnessed one of these executions. Allegedly, it took 17 days for the victim to finally succumb to the horrors and perish. Despite the many great faults and achievements of our species, The branch of history that has been tainted by blood, pus, and apparently honey and milk is a fascinating trail to wander down. There's a certain wonder that comes from humanity's brutality. Of course, what we have explored today hardly grazes the surface of what twisted inventions exist. But due to certain circumstances, I'm rather pressed for time. Regardless, thank you for your time and support, no matter how brief. I hope to see you again. Have a pleasant day.